He had merely knocked over a bottle of milk, and his mother called him a stupid pig in front of everyone, saying his birth was a colossal mistake, that his 10-pound head had caused her 10 hours of agony. To show just how heavy 10 pounds was, she grabbed the newly bought potatoes and rice and held them together.
Et après on se retrouve avec ça. Ça mange, ça coûte, c'est sale.
Kimon never understood. He was a person, so why was he referred to as a thing? The more his mother scolded him, the quieter Kimon grew, until he even developed dyslexia. Reading aloud in class was always stumbling and halting, making his classmates burst into laughter. Even the teacher would publicly humiliate him in front of the class. Kimon didn't dare tell his mother, because communication didn't exist in their home. The words she said most often were,
Tu veux ou tu la veux?
What made it even sadder was that Kimon had never experienced a father's love. He was merely the product of his mother's flings with men, and he had even seen his mother bring various men home. During those times, he was always kicked out of the house. In the blink of an eye, Kimon was over 50. He had worked odd jobs all his life, and was often bullied by various foremen. He would finish 10 hours of work in 8, only to have 2 hours pay secretly docked. He would go back to argue, but because he wasn't good with words, he could only curse a few times at the door. After work, Kimon would always visit the same bar, drinking with a few good buddies. They all liked this gentle giant, except for one sarcastic old man who loved studying history. He would always bring up what he thought were profound topics, leaving Kimon at a loss for words, so the old man could mock him. As his mother grew older, she became erratic, and drove Kimon out of the house. But Kimon never gave up on her. He bought a camper van and parked it in the yard, just so he could take care of her more easily. Yet, his mother's harsh attitude never changed. Fortunately, Kimon had a girlfriend who loved him. Whenever he felt depressed or troubled, she would always be a light that warmed him. Kimon had a peculiar habit. He loved counting pigeons in the park on sunny afternoons. But suddenly today someone interrupted him.
19. Je sais qu'il y en a 19. Qu'est-ce qui vous fait rire?
Que vous me disiez jeune homme.
The old lady said that compared to her, Kimon was still young. She was 95 years old, yet remained elegant and dignified. Learning that Kimon had given each pigeon a name, she was very curious. Kimon said it was because each had its own distinct traits. For example, Pierre and Titmouse were inseparable. The one always trying to lead was Stubborn Mule. The one with a feather in its mouth was called Thief. Then there were Biscuit and Marguerite. The old lady was surprised, because her name was Marguerite, though with 2 T's. Her father had accidentally written it that way, but her mother found it interesting and kept it.
Ça leur a plu. Je suis née d'une histoire d'amour. Enfin, comme tout le monde.
Non, pas comme tout le monde. Il y en a qui sont nés par mégarde.
Marguerite realized she had inadvertently touched a sore spot for Kimon, and didn't press further. But after that, the two often met in the park. Over time, it seemed to become an unspoken agreement. Marguerite loved reading, and would bring books to share with Kimon. She never mocked his ignorance, and would deliberately pick gripping passages to read aloud to him. Kimon's barren mind began to sprout wisdom. Those once unfamiliar words turned into vivid images, flashing before him one by one. He became her most devoted listener, immersed in the vibrant world Marguerite created for him. But back at home, all that greeted Kimon was his mother's curses. He brought her fruit, only to be scolded for dirtying the floor. He fetched her mail, but she mistakenly thought he wanted to steal her pension. He gave her vegetables he had grown himself, but each time, she threw them right in his face, then went to the garden to haphazardly pull vegetables herself. Even Kimon's friends couldn't stand her behavior. Marguerite was almost the opposite of his mother. She always smiled and encouraged Kimon, saying he had a great auditory memory. When she finished reading The Plague alone, she said she had read it with Kimon, which made him feel a bit ashamed. But Marguerite said listening was also a form of reading, that having an excellent listener made reading all the more meaningful. Then Marguerite gave him the book. And so, in his 50s, Kimon painstakingly began to read again. Slowly, he fell in love with reading, learning to comfort others with clever words, and retort his friends' teasing with wit. One day, while recalling a line from a book, he remembered a childhood dream, that of a stained glass craftsman, which his mother had mocked as non-existent. To this day, he still longed for that work. He also recalled a more hidden, subtle memory. That day, one of his mother's boyfriends had hit him, but back then, his mother had immediately stood up for him, running outside with a fork, and stabbing the man's leg several times, before chasing him out of the house. His mother was an irritable and poorly educated single mother, but also the woman who raised her son alone, and drove away abusive men. Kimon couldn't quite see clearly how he felt about his mother. He asked Marguerite, saying he had been thinking about a line from a book, wailing at my mother's grave like a dog. Marguerite was surprised by his memory, and found the original passage in the book. When we arrive at dawn, having spent a lifetime searching, hoping, waiting, making promises we can never keep, there will come a day when we return to our mother's grave, and wail like an abandoned dog. This came from Romain Gary's autobiographical novel, Promise at Dawn, which tells of his attachment to his mother, and her endless maternal love. But whenever the topic of maternal love came up, Kimon always avoided it.
Comment était-elle avec vous, enfant?
S'en foutait.
Et maintenant?
Marguerite comforted him, saying that if a person didn't receive enough love in childhood, then all love awaits them to discover. Although Kimon deeply resented his mother, when friends joked about her, he would still angrily defend her. Just as his mother had once stood up for him, his girlfriend had always wanted a child. But Kimon, plagued by insecurity, never dared agree. He felt he was just a useless waste. One day, Marguerite gave him a thick dictionary. She believed that with it, Kimon could freely navigate the sea of books. Kimon treasured it like a precious gift, but ultimately, his age was against him, and combined with his dyslexia, the obscure arrangements of letters, and emotionless definitions gave him a headache. Kimon returned the dictionary to Marguerite, saying he didn't want to read anymore. Before, his life had been a mess, but with his numb and simple mind, he couldn't see anything. Now reading makes the pain clearer and unbearable. He wanted to return to just listening. However, Marguerite then told him some bad news. She had macular degeneration in her eyes. The spots would only grow until everything went dark. When that happened, she would be a blind woman needing a cane. Though Marguerite was still smiling, Kimon knew that for someone who loved books as much as she did, never being able to read again was a heavy blow. After returning home, Kimon stayed up all night making a cane. He told his girlfriend about meeting Marguerite and their shared regret. His girlfriend comforted him, saying, since she can't read anymore, you can become her eyes. The next day, Kimon went to the library for the first time, and borrowed a short, easy-to-understand novel. That night, his girlfriend gently leaned against him, guiding him to read word by word. A few days later, Marguerite received the cane Kimon had carefully crafted. She loved it dearly, constantly running her hands over it. Kimon asked her to close her eyes, then took out the novel he had practiced many times, and began to read aloud. This time, there was no teachers yelling, no classmates' laughter, no stumbling over words, only pigeons occasionally looking up, bearing witness to this beautiful moment. As night fell, Kimon returned home, to find all the lights on. When he entered the bedroom, he discovered his mother had passed away in her sleep. The woman he had both loved and hated had left him forever. Kimon leaned over and kissed her cheek. Grief flooded his heart. In that moment, he finally understood the meaning of those words. We will return to our mother's grave, and wail like an abandoned dog. After the funeral, the estate notary met with Kimon, and presented him with his mother's belongings. Among them was a house. It turned out his mother had worked day and night for decades, saving every penny, just to buy that house, and leave it to him, though she had never told him. Then the lawyer brought an iron box, containing items belonging to Kimon from his childhood. Perhaps some kinds of love can't be judged by words alone, but upon careful reflection, they can be found in the smallest details. Kimon found his girlfriend, and spoke of his forgiveness toward his mother. The knot that had troubled him for years was finally untied, but his girlfriend looked conflicted. She told him she was pregnant. Kimon's expression shifted from stunned to joyful. He no longer resisted the idea. Now he was ready to love. Life felt so beautiful, and he couldn't wait to share it with Marguerite. But when he arrived at the nursing home, the staff told him Marguerite had moved to another facility, leaving only the dictionary for him. It turned out Marguerite had no children, and the nursing home fees had always been paid by her nephew. But the cost here was too high, and her nephew's family could no longer manage, so they moved her elsewhere. Kimon sat alone in the park, looking at the dictionary Marguerite had left behind. Once, she had guided him on a journey of reading, helping him heal and find redemption. This time, he would become Marguerite's cane and eyes. He found the address and located the remote nursing home. Passing through crowded, dilapidated corridors, the air was thick with the scent of aging and death. That lonely yet elegant figure stood out vividly, and while Marguerite was still surprised by his arrival, Kimon quickly wheeled her out of there, on that long and sun-drenched road. Although Kimon was still someone who could barely support himself, at this moment, he feared nothing.
Et le temps qu'il trouve le mot dans le dictionnaire, on sera déjà chez nous.
Chez nous? Comment chez nous? J'ai pas de chez nous.
Ben enfin. Si, chez moi.
Oh.
This is not a love story, but love, emotion, and the story all exist.